Thanks for joining. I'll start off by thanking also the panelists for joining us today to share their wisdom from their past experiences. I'll kick it off by telling you a little bit about myself, and then I'll pass it to everyone else for about a minute introduction. So my name is Joseph Aleem. I'm currently the head of customer and product experience at an HR tech startup called Compt. We help companies create and manage personalized perk stipends. And before this, I was actually co-founder of a talent tech startup called ScholarJet, where I wore many hats and I dabbled a little bit in the HR people operations space as well. So that's kind of where my perspective is coming from. I'll kick it off by asking Libby to do a minute introduction first.
All right. Hi, everyone. So I am Libby. I formerly was managing HR for a small cybersecurity startup called Digital Shadows for 5 years. I joined them when they were at about 35 employees, only based in London, and then helped them expand over into the US until we got close to 200 people. And it was everything kind of covering the whole gambit that we'll talk about today: recruiting, L&D, compliance, benefits, payroll. And actually next week, I am very excited to be starting a new role with another cybersecurity company. So kind of taking everything I learned and applying it somewhere new.
Awesome. Natasha, why don't you go next?
Hey everyone, so I'm super excited to be here. Thanks Joe and Startup Boston, everyone for putting this together. So I'm Natasha Scott. Most recently, I was HR generalist at Lola.com. I had started there actually in March of last year. And unfortunately, due to the pandemic, a bunch of us were laid off this past March. But at the time when I started, there was about 80 employees. And by the time I left, there was probably a little over 100. So we grew pretty quickly, which was awesome. I did just recently start a new job this week, which is really exciting, and why this panel actually is so on point, at a company called Getaway, where I am going to be the people and culture partner. So same thing, working with a small people ops group at Lola. I was the second kind of formal HR hire on a team of 4. And at Getaway, I am the second hire, all happening in just a couple months. So a lot to do and a great opportunity to kind of build our people ops strategy.
Awesome. Congrats, Natasha. And let's do Stephanie next.
Hi, thanks so much. And thank you too for having us here. This is exciting and fun to share all the knowledge across HR. So my name's Stephanie Bishop. I'm head of people at Hi Marley. Hi Marley is an insurtech startup. So we're a platform that simplifies communication for the insurance ecosystem and their customers. I joined the company, so we were founded in 2017. I joined as the 6th employee in 2018. We are now 46 employees, and I joined heading up their talent, and then grew to head of people, so doing all the people things. I do have one person, a team member, which is really exciting. So she just started a couple of months ago, and she's heading up our talent now. So that's where we're at, and I think I covered it all. Right.
Awesome. And Courtney.
Hey everybody, so my name is Courtney Utzi, and I am the Senior Manager of HR Operations, Talent, and Culture at Enzivant Therapeutics, which is a small biotech company based out of Cambridge that focuses on rare diseases in the life sciences industry. I've been there since 2018. We've been around since 2016. And we started out a little bit larger initially, and I was actually brought in as part of the team to bring HR in-house from our parent. Over the last 2 years, it's been a fun ride, and so I am actually now the sole HR person managing everything HR, that point of contact for everyone. And so it's been a ride, but it's been a fun one, and we're growing, which is really, really exciting. And so I'm happy to be here today.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for those great introductions. So I'm going to kick off with this first question. Everyone seems to be in either a very small People Ops HR team or either the only person on the People Ops HR team. So I'm going to start off by asking, how do you generally keep yourself on task, motivated, and did this change since kind of working remotely? So actually, Courtney, why don't you kick off this one first?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when it comes to staying on task and really staying motivated, I'm a visual person, I'm a list person, and I pride myself on being able to kind of prioritize all of these moving pieces because I am managing all of these different moving pieces and work streams. So I would say a lot of my staying on task is through lists and really just prioritizing and asking people what the timeline is, what the deadline is, as well as setting expectations with people because I'm by myself. And so work with me, work with me. So I would say that's really how I stay on task. Just not being afraid of asking questions. I've been fortunate to touch some parts of HR that I had never touched before, and so it's all about being clear with that and keeping a learning mentality and knowing that I have the ability to learn and grow from all of my peers, which is really exciting and helpful. From a motivation standpoint, I try to center myself on why I'm doing this. I care about my position, especially as a Black woman in HR and a Black woman in industry. And it's important to me to be that representation and to be that voice in the room. And so when I have those moments where I'm having these HR moments and I'm like, oh my gosh, why am I here? I really remember that's why I'm here. It's all about representation and providing access and really enabling people to be their best selves. And that really matters to me. And so that keeps me grounded.
Awesome. That's a great kind of motivating story. Were there any kind of big changes that, because working remotely, did you have to change any of that story that you told yourself or change any of the tools that you were using?
It's a good question. I mean, for starters, I certainly had not set up a home office for myself yet and didn't think I needed to. And so I in those moments of stress and moments where I feel a bit overworked, I kind of try to remember the essentials that I need to be successful. And so when we transitioned into a remote environment, I said, okay, I need a place to work. I need a place to focus. And so that's what brought forth me setting up a office. And then it was, I need pads of paper to take notes and to make my lists because lists are helpful to me. And so just remembering those things that are very basic, but core to me feeling like I have a grasp on things, I was able to do that over the course of a couple of weeks of remaining remote. And so that's been really helpful. Although, of course, I think all of us kind of had that, whoa, maybe this will be a thing for like 2 weeks. And then it was, oh, it's going to be longer than that. Maybe I should get some more stuff. So patience with myself has been helpful too.
Awesome. Thank you. Libby, anything to add on that about your kind of task management motivation, any changes for remote?
Sure. So very similar to Courtney in that having the to-do list for today, for the quarter, kind of keeping those all organized. And I would say above and beyond that, one of the biggest changes I had to make was really reprioritizing things. So if not weekly, daily, what's on the to-do list. And because, being a team of one, you can't really get to everything that you might want to. So I would say it really has helped me kind of get to a point where I'm able to push back a bit and say, okay, I have all these things going on and they need to get done at some point within the next month, for example, but really what are the top priority items? And if something new comes on, where does that fall within it? And I think going through that process pretty frequently really helps me stay on top of what needs to get done during those days where you're pulled into lots of different calls or meetings or someone needs help and you just simply can't really say no. So that's one big thing, is just the prioritization list. And the other is a really quick technique called the Pomodoro tactic that I've become obsessed with. And it's basically you set a timer for 20 minutes and you shut down all other distractions like your cell phone, Slack, email. You focus on one thing. So one particular project. It could be just going through resumes on your ATS, for example. And then the timer goes off and you have a 5-minute break and you can look at whatever you want and then set it again. And if you do that just in smaller chunks throughout your day, at least for me, I found it to be incredibly helpful in getting through really difficult weeks where it just seems like everything's falling on you.
Awesome. Definitely a +1 for the Pomodoro technique. I found that to be very helpful while I was in college in the past, different techniques like that. Anyone else have anything to add on that? Natasha or Stephanie, would you like to comment?
I'd like to plus one on the Pomodoro too. I don't know how I just heard of it, but and I think that, particularly now, I don't know if other people are feeling this way, but just like in this current state of the world, like the lack of focus, I just feel like there's like even, it's very, very hard to focus with all of the things that we're thinking about. So that one thing that we're trying to adopt is like an agile framework, like across the company. So not just in engineering and doing things in sprints. So haven't like perfected that yet, but I think I'm excited about that because I think that that's how, to have those little wins and successes and to feel like you're getting the things done that you set out to do. And then we also use objectives and key results. So I think that that's a good way to prioritize like on a quarterly basis. And then a tool that we're using, I don't know if y'all have heard of it, is called Monday.com. It's kind of like a Trello. It's kind of like a task board. So that's been helpful too. So just some of the quick tips that we've been using.
Awesome. Natasha, anything to add there?
Yeah, I honestly just piggyback off of what everyone just said. And, I'm going into the remote life kind of just starting this week. So there's a lot that I'm learning. And even I didn't really have a desk set up and everything like Courtney, you were just saying. I really felt it. It's hard to be as productive when you don't have your settings set up the way that you can be most productive. So that's on my list of priorities just to set myself up for success. So, getting my desk situated, and then I'm a big proponent of to-do lists, and I love to see something crossed off. So that's kind of what helps me to prioritize, writing it down, crossing it off. And that helps me to get things done. So just kind of being more aware of my surroundings, how I can be most productive, and that to-do list is everything for me.
So a general question, anyone can answer this, but oftentimes the people ops team might report directly to one of the founders or with the CEO, since there's no kind of other team members to report to. Do you communicate, or how granular do you communicate kind of those to-do lists, those tasks with the rest of your team? Because oftentimes they don't know the million little things that you have to take care of all the time, and they might just be adding more to your plate. Hey, we need to recruit more. Hey, we need to do this. We need to do this. How do you kind of communicate your task load or your workload to kind of your team, your manager, etc.? Anyone can dive in first if they want.
So there was a bit of a breakdown I had recently. So I report directly to the CEO, and that was happening, right? There wasn't a lot of purview into what was going on in my backlog. And so and I was feeling overwhelmed, and you feel like you can't say no. So something that we've adopted is just like a way to sort of just like figure out like how urgent and important this is to literally ask that, like, put it in a bucket. Is it urgent and important? Is it important? Or like, can this wait a quarter? So that way, like I had an understanding of just like actually how, where on my priority list. And he's really good about saying like, if you say yes to this, what are you saying no to? So normalizing that within our culture, that like there's a ton of things flying at us all of the time. So if I am saying yes, I have to choose something to say no to. So I think that's been helpful too.
Great.
I'll jump in. One of the things that we did at Enzavant, which has been really helpful for us as a culture, I think, is kind of with this new remote environment, we rolled out something called the Jumpstart. And so every Monday, actually, as a team of about 20 or 21, we all get on Zoom and we talk about the pressing things that we're working on during the week. Now, in my role, obviously, there are certain things that I'm not going to reveal just yet that I'm working on, or things that might be stirring underneath, but it's a great opportunity for me to share and get everyone on the team to understand kind of what's going on in my world, because we're not in the office. They might not see some of the things that I'm working on or hear of it in passing from me. And so that's been really, really helpful. And the other thing that I've done is I've made sure to meet with each of our executive leaders once a month. And so that's been really helpful as well for sharing kind of what's on my plate. And it creates an opportunity for me to understand from them, how can I be a partner to them in their functions and their teams. I report into the COO and now meet with my CEO very, very regularly because we work on projects together. But just getting kind of that round robin interaction with the other executives has been really helpful for them getting an understanding and for me being able to be a better partner to them too.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm going to move on to the next question, so we have a lot of good ones here. So here, a lot of people were the first people ops person at their companies. So I'd like to ask, what were some of the first things you did when you first joined the company? Processes that you set into place, adopting certain software, some of the, like, week one, month one. Tell me a little bit about kind of what happened there first. And I'll start with Natasha.
Yeah. So when I joined Lola, my first big project was rolling out an HRIS. Prior to rolling something out, everything was really manual, and that was everything from anything onboarding, offboarding, new hire paperwork, enrolling in benefits, tracking anything at all. It was really manual, and a lot of it was also very paper heavy. And so it was my first task, so I had to jump right into it. And there was definitely a lot of due diligence that went into the process, having to talk to a lot of different systems, building relationships with, the different people in the company to hear what the pain points are, what the opportunities are, and what they're looking for to try and systemize a lot of processes. So, after getting that feedback and hearing the opportunities, I was able to implement a system, and there was kind of a lot at the time, that we had to align it with. I think it was really important to have, all the systems talking together, and that could be something like, we wanted payroll to be able to talk to onboarding and offboarding and benefits, and not all systems do that. So there was definitely a lot of time spent in trying to figure out what would be the best one for the company. And we ended up going with Paylocity, and it was definitely a really, proud rollout, because there was nothing prior to that, and definitely easier for all the employees to have a system that they could easily access, when they wanted to check out any of their information. Because as I mentioned, it was really just living on the G drive. And as you grow really quickly, you can imagine that can just, it's kind of hard to maintain that. And this just made it far more easy and efficient. But I think it really comes down to figuring out, what are the priorities that we're kind of talking about in the company, and what needs to be done to help just find a little more success. So for me, it was rolling out that HRIS, and I had a couple months to do it, and just came in, hit the ground running, and it was a success.
Awesome. Libby, can you tell us a little bit about some of the first things you did when you joined your team?
Sure. So it was really a back to basics moment, I have to say. When I joined, as I mentioned earlier, we had just opened in the US in San Francisco, and we had a London office. And very quickly, we actually hired folks remotely in a handful of other states across the US. So the first few months were focused on making sure we had, our payroll system was covering all the right taxes for each state, like their city and state level. It was really making sure our benefits had national coverage, and our handbooks were set up. We had a recruitment process in place. And those were the first, I would say, 6 months or so, was just focused on kind of making sure we actually had a plan and process for all of the foundational work. And then we were able to focus kind of after those 6 months more so on making it a global process, and looking at things like an HRIS and ATS that would work globally. Because our biggest issue, I think, at first was trying to have a system that could do everything. And then we realized that for our size company and what we could kind of pay, what our budget was, we weren't able to get a lot of these much larger systems in place. So we ended up doing Bamboo HR for an HRIS, which is fantastic for small companies. And then we use Workable for our ATS. And then we had separate payroll and benefit systems in the US and the UK, which has worked well, and it's kept things very streamlined and easily accessible for just kind of the size and stage we were at.
Gotcha. Courtney, would you like to add to that some of your first few months experience?
Sure. The mute button was acting funny on me. One of the first things I did when I started, given I was brought in to help kind of complete the in-house transfer of HR to our company, is I really did an audit on everything. So my first question was, what files do we have? What don't we have? what are the processes we have, what are the ones we don't have. And so it was a really fun time for me to kind of do a lot of that implementation, a lot of those basics that I kind of brought in from my previous organization. And so that was really fun. And then the other thing I did is I really tried to meet everyone. Ironically, and I think what was really nice is that my first day was actually a team offsite in North Carolina. So I met everyone in the company on my first day, which not a lot of people get. And it was like, okay, a lot of names. But I spent the next couple of weeks actually meeting with people individually to understand how long they've been there, what was the interaction with HR in the past, what are they looking for in an HR partner, how I could be a resource to them, what they're looking to see, feedback, all of that. And so it was really important for me to get a pulse on really the culture as well as the people, so that I could, as I'm doing my audit, understand what makes sense to implement and to try out, to test.
Gotcha. I'd like to do a quick rapid fire sharing your HR tech stack and how, if you would recommend the tools that you're using to similarly sized companies, and then if you would say you would recommend, a different tool if your company has passed like a certain size. If you want, you can also comment on whether you actually think you need one of those tools at the time. So when I was working on ScholarJet, we were 6-7 people. We didn't really need an ATS because we hired, once every, few months, every year. So let's go around and just talk about HR tech stack, pros, cons. Let's start off with Stephanie there.
So we use TriNet for our HRIS system. We use Greenhouse for our ATS system. As far as TriNet, I don't have a ton of other perspective on pros and cons for TriNet. It's great. It's fine. I'm pretty neutral on it. And then Greenhouse so far. So we just rolled this out to the company. So I'm really excited. I've heard wonderful things about it. So very excited about Greenhouse. We also use for performance management and overall employee engagement. We use 15.5 and also for one-on-ones and housing our OKRs. And then I had mentioned Monday.com as a organizational tool. And then the other system that I haven't launched the survey yet, but we got Culture Amp to be able to launch, surveys. So I'm really excited about that too. So
cool. Thanks. Yep. Natasha, why don't you go next? You can comment on Lola. If you know your next company stack, you can talk about that too.
Probably know a little bit more about Lola's. Getaway has just been a couple days.
Yep.
I will say that Getaway is using TriNet, so Stephanie,
Awesome.
maybe you can give me some tips and tricks there. But at Lola for our ATS, initially we were using Google Hire, but it came to a point where that just wasn't going to be a system in use anymore. So it kind of forced us to have to find something, and ended up moving forward with Lever. Which definitely was far more robust and integrated with the systems that we were using. And as I mentioned before, the HRIS that we rolled out was Paylocity. And we use Paylocity for payroll, for benefits, for the entire employee life cycle. And I will say the reason we went with that is because it's something that would grow with the company, and we had really ambitious goals to double in size by the end of next year, which would put us around 300 employees. I think kind of Joe, like what you're saying, for a small company, you don't really need all the most robust tech stack out there. I think it's a little easier to be a little bit more manual, but if there are lofty goals to grow, I think it is important to look into some system, because you can get bogged down with a lot of that work, and to have these systems, it definitely helps to create those efficiencies. And the reason we chose what we did is because it was really important to focus on the framework of HR ops and a lot of the transactional stuff, especially initially when you're growing that tech stack. So anything that has to do with payroll, benefits, or policies, and obviously with that is the talent management, so attracting, retaining. It's looking at those systems, and that's what we really focused on at Lola. And I imagine that's what I'm going to be focusing on going into this next role, since I think the only thing we really have is TriNet, and we have to figure out everything else from there.
Awesome. Libby?
Yeah, so we use Bamboo HR for our HRS, which I love, and also performance management. They have a very, very easy process. You can set it up quarterly, annually, twice a year. It's super easy, and it works really well globally too. And you can do onboarding on their system as well. I think if I were to have shifted it, I probably would have done something more on greenhouse, because you also have the ATS aspect and to pull it all into one. One thing we did early on when like I was running payroll when we were super small in the US, like 10 employees, we used Gusto, which I thought was really easy for someone who is not a payroll expert by any means. But as you grow, we ended up pulling in a PEO called My Melita Group, who are fantastic across the US. And I wish I had actually brought them in earlier. And they moved all of our payroll and US benefits into ADP. And they basically run it all for you because it's such a scary system. You have to be like an expert to really know how to utilize it. And their team eventually took over all payroll and benefits, and they were kind of our one-stop shop for initial questions for everyone. So it took so much of that workload off of me. And one thing I could not recommend enough, depending on kind of your budget and size company, if you're able to bring in a PEO, if you're the only people ops person, as early on as you can, that's going to really allow you to focus on kind of the meatier work, a lot of the stuff Courtney's mentioned on partnering with the exec team, with your managers, with everyone in the company, and kind of building out performance management, learning all of that kind of side of the talent house a bit more. So I could not recommend, like My Melita, we worked with One Digital as well, who are also fantastic. So those were the main ones we were utilizing. And Culture Amp too, like Stephanie said, which I love for engagement surveys.
Awesome. Courtney, any last comments on this one?
Yeah, I use Jazz applicant tracking system for our ATS right now. We haven't done too much hiring over the past 2 years of me being there, and so I felt that it was appropriate for now, and I think that we'll look to scale and perhaps reconsider at some point in the future, but I'm familiar with it and I enjoy the system. I laughed, Libby, when you said ADP, because we actually use ADP for our HRIS, and I am just now starting the process of looking for a new HRIS. So, so I'm looking we use our ADP right now for payroll processing, reporting, as well as just kind of general information storage. But I am looking at something a bit more robust that'll allow us to do some more with performance management and really provide an interface for employees and a little bit more self-service. In the past, I've used Namely, and that was something I was a major fan of. Not sure if that'll be what we use here, but we started the process. So we'll see what happens. I took some notes.
Awesome. We have a question from the audience about whether anyone has combined an ATS and CRM together. I can definitely comment on that, but was anyone early enough that it actually made sense to combine the two? All right, I'll quickly comment on that. So we actually use HubSpot as a CRM for kind of customer management. And then we just created a separate deal pipeline for kind of tracking applicants. And it was pretty similar to any standard Trello board. You move things along. It worked out pretty well as we were still a pretty small company. You could replicate the same thing on any Kanban style column board, Monday, Asana, Trello, HubSpot, any kind of sales tool typically has that visibility as well. I would say it works until you're hiring, maybe, more than a handful of people per year. And then you might want more visibility than that. So quick comment there. Awesome questions so far. I'm actually going to ask another audience question right now. So I'd love if people could comment on how much of what they're doing was learned on the job versus from previous experiences, either college education or some other boot camp or somewhere. Like, how did you all kind of ramp up to where you are today? And then how did you react when there were things that you had to take on that you had no experience for? And I think being in the startup world, many of us are handling very new situations all the time. For example, a worldwide pandemic, everyone is handling that for the first time probably. So we'll go around. Let's start with Natasha.
I would say in a lot of situations, I was thrown into the fire and it didn't really come with a lot of formal training, which I think can be really great. I think it's one of the pros of being, the sole person or on a very small team. And, when I didn't really know what to do, which definitely came up quite a bit, even to this day, of course, it's really leaning on my network and, the different industry leaders, checking them out. And, there are so many different resources out there that you can look into to try and figure this stuff out. But definitely leaning on my network was probably the biggest thing. Because at a lot of these startups, there really isn't budget to have too many outside resources or consultants to really lean on. So building my network is what has really been a saving grace for me. Especially in a time like a pandemic, this is new to everybody. And a lot of companies are just kind of figuring it out the best that works with their culture. So there's a lot that, you learn in different courses that you take, whether it be school or certifications. But personally, I've learned a lot just being on the job and the experiences, and there's always something new. I think, especially when you're in a people ops world, people are changing, business is changing, technology is changing. There's so much evolving that it's much easier for me to personally learn on the job when I'm being thrown all these different things at any given moment.
Thank you. Stephanie?
Yeah, +1 to all of that, Natasha. It's so funny to look around when one of us is answering and then the rest of us are like,
We're all like,
oh, yeah. So definitely the network. So I had no prior experience within people ops at all. I had 17 years of recruiting experience, came here as a recruiter. And so every day is really new and I'm figuring it out as I go. Network is huge. And then books, High Growth Handbook, so it's just, I think that it's to have at your fingertips, the knowledge of okay, this isn't the first time this has ever happened. Let me just go to this and then go to the network. I think, and not being afraid to ask and not being afraid to be I don't know. I haven't done this before. So I feel like the HR community is so giving and generous with their time and knowledge, which we're all really fortunate for. So.
Awesome. Livy, anything extra to add there?
Yeah, similarly was also kind of thrown into this. The past 5 years were the first time I've been in an HR role as well. So a lot of learning on the spot. I think networking is just honestly the best advice I can give. And it's really just a +1 to what Natasha and Stephanie said too. Slack groups are super handy to go through. And most of the time someone's already posted something. Even studying for a certification, I chose the SHRM CP as kind of the first thing I did when I got into the role. And just the studying process, I learned so much throughout that too, just some of the foundational frameworks within it. And another thing is I realized tapping your investors as well. So for our company, it was something that very early on, your investors want to see you succeed. And if you're the only person in people ops or HR in general, they often have an entire network of resources that would be happy to give you some time, some initial phone calls, or do a little contract work to pull in, someone who can help in an area that you're really uncertain on. So I utilized a lot of our investors and their contacts quite a bit over the past few years.
Definitely +1 that a lot of startup founders work closely with their investors for things like sales, marketing, engineering, but oftentimes the kind of G&A or the people ops gets kind of pushed over to the side. Investors are really good about sharing their networks, so definitely +1 to that. Courtney, any last thoughts on sharing on this?
Yeah, +1 on everything that was said. I actually chose Libby, the PHR that I'm studying for currently, and so I've gotten some additional learning from that, which has been really helpful. I had a role previous to this that was HR, and so that was kind of the introduction into HR, which was great. And then this role kind of fast-tracked me very quickly and threw all these other topics at me, which was really good. But I would just add, I think, just the powership of mentorship. I have mentors, people I've worked with in the past as consultants or as managers that I lean on. If I have a question, I'm really quick to ask the question, hey, do you have a second? I think I have an idea of this, but I just want to talk it out. And just really using the HR community as well. I have my go-to people that I'll message and say, hey, do you have a minute? We'll just talk through things. All of that's been really, really helpful. But I absolutely am thankful for where I've gotten so far. And I don't think I would have gotten to where I am now if not for being thrown into the fire. And so it was totally worth it.
Awesome. I think something's just so great about the startup people ops community in general in Boston. It's so strong. Everyone wants to help each other. A lot of people are figuring things out for the first time, even the veterans who've been doing it for 20 years, people sharing tools, resources, tips, tricks. So it's just awesome to see this community and interact with it all the time. Switching gears to a slightly different question. So being a very small team, being in the startup environment, we're always strapped for cash. So a lot of people are wearing many, many hats. You're doing HR, recruiting, talent management, employee relations, office management sometimes, even buying the snacks for the office. Can you talk quickly about the pros and cons about having one person doing it all? And I hope there are some pros in there. And then talk about which kind of function would be the first one that you would hire another person for to kind of share the responsibility there. And that might just be dependent on your own kind of preference and skill set, but quickly comment on that. Let's go with Stephanie first this time.
Well, I pro is keeps you lean, right? Keeps you busy. It keeps you very involved. Like, what's going on at all times. I think that like you have your finger on the pulse at all times. So I think that those are some of the pros. The cons is just like the lack of focus. I was finding like the busier that we got and the more that we were hiring, the context switching was just getting too much. And I felt as though like, it's just like, you've got some fast paced things, right? Like recruiting. And then there's like some strategic things you need to just like sort of just like zoom out. And I think it's really hard to do that at a certain scale. So I think that that's probably, the cons from my perspective. And then just like I guess there's one more, maybe just like the lack of that very specific knowledge in that area. Like, it's so helpful, right, to be able to bring people in that can really hone in and live into their superpowers and make a really big impact versus just like spreading yourself super, super thin. So
your team just hire a recruiter, I think you mentioned?
Yes.
Gotcha. How's that feel?
It feels great. It feels weird though, because that's my background. So now I'm like, okay, great. So now I have somebody that that was my safe space. And now I'm like, now I'm out here in the world that is new to me, but it feels wonderful. She's amazing. So
awesome. Natasha.
I think there are definitely a lot of pros and definitely some cons to go along with it. But I think, some of the pros are there's a lot of visibility being that sole person. And that's a great opportunity, really a huge one to build, trusting relationships and really show that you can be a strategic, valuable partner to the business. It's also a great opportunity to be creative and make the role your own. And, some cons would probably be, it is very exciting, but it also can be a little daunting. Realistically, that's a lot. There could be some pressure on there. One ER investigation could throw you off from all the tasks that you've been working on, or, something like a pandemic. Everyone's coming to you to figure out what those answers are. And this is so new to everyone. So, that can be really tough, and burnout is real. So making sure you're kind of trying to figure out to take some time for yourself, but how do you do that when you're the only person wearing a million hats? So trying to prioritize a lot of different things that can sometimes be difficult and challenging, but I think being able to experience all of it gives you such a leg up and figuring out what is the next best hire. How should this team grow? How can this team be one that can make a huge impact here? And wearing all those hats, you're experiencing all of it. What will be best as you continue to grow. And I feel like, if it is a company that is growing really quickly, probably the next best hire, what Stephanie did, is a recruiter. But I think it's always important to try and, bring someone on who can, be a strategic partner and maybe has a little bit of experience. But if you're growing quickly, it's always great to have the support of being able to strategically and thoughtfully bring on, attract, retain, and really great talent.
Gotcha. Courtney.
I agree with everything that's been said so far. I would think another pro, perhaps from the employee perspective, is, well, I'm your point of contact for everything, so there's no confusion. you know to go to me. And so and being as I know my level of attention, I know my ambition, and so I know what the end product looks like because I have all of the control over it, which is nice. I would say as a pro or as a con, I agree with what's been said so far. Time management can be difficult at times. Taking time off was really hard for me initially. I took a week off to go to Spain one year, and I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do? It was hard to kind of remove myself and leave it. I left everything in a good place, but I still was very nervous because I'm used to being so involved in everything. It gets lonely sometimes as well. Although I will say over the last couple of months, I have been able to get some recruiting help through a contract recruiter. So it's been nice to have her around, and she's wrapping up in mid-October. So I will miss her. I think from a, next role standpoint, I'd probably bring in, if not a full-time recruiting resource to help with any increased headcount, I'd be open to bringing in somebody who's a bit more junior to really train them up and help them understand and get kind of in the weeds of HR so that I can focus on some of the more strategic related things and they can focus on more of the tactical things. I was fortunate to be a part of a organization prior where my manager, really poured into me. And so I would love to do that to somebody else because I think that's part of what's got me here today. So
awesome. Great. Paying it forward.
yeah.
Libby, any comments on kind of the wearing many hats, but also could you comment on how you can communicate with your leadership team to prioritize expanding your function, expanding your team?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think plus one to everything that's been said, another pro simply about being kind of the one person is really just as you're growing the culture at the company, you being in that one role are threading together so many other things. So it's nice in that you have that holistic perspective of the employee life cycle and experience there. And that's where you can help drive more strategic longer term projects, which was something I think on the days where I would have a tough time or too overwhelmed, burned out, not feeling like I have anything creative going on, reminding myself of that was a huge motivator and kind of reset moment. On working with the exec teams to kind of get buy-in for hiring, I think it's really about telling a story through numbers. So I reported into a CFO for 5 years. So I learned kind of very quickly, how much data is important to kind of get the buy-in within that. So it's really showing the return on investment for things like if you want a recruiter, how much are you spending on your cost per hires plus, general recruiting fees throughout the year, and what would you save by having one person coming in? And also what would that mean for kind of keeping tabs on, rather than working with a handful of external recruiters, having one person who really speaks the internal language and knows the culture and can really kind of sell the same story and keep it consistent. So for my experience within that, it was really kind of showcasing as many data points as I could possibly show, what we'd save, and then what would that actually do for us longer term. And a lot of the times you can connect it back to ARR, sales, things like that. If you're really giving them, your wider company, the resources they need so that they can focus and do their job, and you're there as the resource versus just putting out the fires and being more reactive, then that just is a pretty easy story to tell, I think. And you also have to add in your own feelings too. Like it's very real. Talk about if you're burned out. Talk about where your time is. Show them a time audit of how you've spent your past month on each and every little thing. And I think that's incredibly helpful to showcase, okay, we're probably at the point where your time is better spent doing XYZ. So if you have this new hire come in, it kind of shifts the balance a bit more. So I probably utilized as many of those items as I could over the past few years to get some extra help on the team.
That's awesome. Do you have one example, and no pressure if you don't, of how you tied in kind of like people ops into ARR, MRR for the company? Any initiatives or any kind of justification there?
Yeah, I think the way in which I would go about it would be, and it would be kind of just where's my time being spent, and then where do we have some burning issues that I just haven't been able to really get to. So especially on performance management side, for example, if like churn or we weren't finding the right folks in client success, for example, and it was because my attention was all focused on these other areas and not recruiting for this one specific team, or working through kind of manager training, for example, then you can kind of showcase, okay, how does that actually kind of feed into, well, we lost some deals, or we lost some employees because we didn't onboard them as best as we could. So I think finding those linchpins and was really important for us to kind of portray that story a bit more. And it's a really quick thing to also show, okay, give me 6 to 12 months with this new hire, and we'll see some changes here. And if you can at least get kind of a trial period like that, you should see some changes pretty quickly.
Awesome. Great answer. Thank you. I'm going to pull in a couple of questions for the audience. We have about 10 minutes left. This is an interesting question. It's to those of you who have been part of a very small team, have you found that you're relied on to be an office parent and sometimes a friend? Any pros and cons to that? I think oftentimes people ops HR is seen as that kind of warm, fuzzy, friendly person, at least in modern times. Former HR, maybe I can't comment on that, but any kind of pros and cons to being that person, and kind of, should there be boundaries? What kind of boundaries do you set in place? This one is open to anyone, so any volunteers? It's a tough one.
I'll jump in. Yes, I think that is definitely real. And I don't know, I'm actually eager to hear from the other panelists how I haven't had it hasn't been a negative yet. It hasn't been a con yet, but I suspect at some point it will be, because I think it might be a little bit of, it's hard to spread yourself to be a friend to everybody as you're scaling. And so I think that's a little bit unrealistic. So I guess, if I am quickly reflecting back on it, like that seems to be difficult. And then now I feel guilty because I'm not able to maintain the relationships that I did in the early days, with everybody. So I don't know if there's other perspectives.
So I read something recently about migrating away from being that shoulder to lean on / cry on, and being more that person or that ear that listens. And so I've been thinking a bit about my role and how I think I've seen myself transition over time. In the past, yeah, I've been the I'm a friendly HR person, but I've been that like friend. But there have been moments where I've had to put my friend hat down and put my HR hat on. And so I've been through a reduction in force where somebody who was a friend to this day, was impacted by that. In fact, that's happened twice already in my career. I've had folks that have felt that our dynamic was a bit more close than perhaps it actually was. And there's no one to blame for that at all. But I definitely think that I've thought a bit about the boundaries that I've set. I've made it very clear that, I'm always here to listen. I'm always here to ask questions. And at times I have felt the need to say, do you want Courtney's insight right now, or do you want HR Courtney's insight right now? Because I'm hearing this, and which one do you want? And that also helps me decide, like, which one do I want to give you based off of the relationship I have with you. But it's always a delicate balance, I think, of making sure that you remain open and accessible, but also having people remember that I'm in this role. No, I can't share that with you. Or, oh, that's interesting. I haven't quite heard that, even though you might have more information, you just can't share it because of your role. So it's always a delicate balance, but I've been thinking more about how to, or at least how I've transitioned. It's more of this ear than this shoulder. I think initially in my career, I tried to be a shoulder, and I just ran into some instances where I couldn't do that.
That's a great analogy. I like the ear versus shoulder.
Yeah.
Anyone have anything else to add before we move into a couple of final rapid fire questions? Alrighty, this has been great so far. Thank you, everyone. So for people trying to break into HR and get their career started in HR, any kind of quick tips, resources that you would recommend? How do you get started in HR? What's the first step?
I can take this one. So I think depending on where you are in your career too, there's kind of different avenues you can go. If you're very early on and you're in college, whatever internships you can get are going to be as helpful as possible. If you've just graduated, being open to different types of roles. So I think a lot of us talked about how when we first joined, it wasn't just an HR role. You might have been doing some EA work, some office management work. I worked on our Salesforce system for a little bit when I first joined. Like, you just have to be open, because I think for HR people ops, there's really not a one size fits all job description or role, really. It's kind of, you're just helping out wherever you can. And so being open-minded with it. And for folks who are a bit later on in their career looking to transition, it's just highlighting those transferable skills and networking. So we've mentioned a lot of Slack groups, and I can try to pop a few into the chat as well. But there's 3 or 4 that I'm on almost daily, and I'm just networking with, listening to what other people are talking about, looking at it, going in and just asking for a quick 20-minute chat, for example. And I think that avenue is just super helpful. And like we said, this community is just so nurturing and open and helpful and supportive that I think luckily it's an industry that I think is just super like arms wide open. If you want to really take this on, come on board and we'll help out.
Awesome. Anyone else? Anyone have any comments about how important it is to have a degree in HR, undergrad, master's degree, certifications? Have they been helpful? Do you think they matter? Would you prioritize them if you were hiring another people ops person?
Personally, I did not graduate with a degree in human resources. And I don't think it wouldn't be a break it or make it for me for someone who didn't have all the experience. I think there's a lot of things that go into it. It's fit, it's passion, it's eager to learn and eager to want to, gain more knowledge about something like people ops or HR. It can certainly be helpful to get like these certifications that Libby and Courtney are talking about. There's a lot that can be learned there. And there's actually, just talking about getting into the world of HR and people ops. When I first got into it, it's like a large umbrella. There's so much and so many different opportunities that I had no idea about. I just thought it was, staffing and employee relations. And that's all that really goes into it when I first, stepped into the world of HR. So I don't think that I don't think you have to have a specific degree. I think that, if you are eager to learn and this is something that you want to be a part of, there's a lot that you can do, and it doesn't take a specific degree to say that you can do that.
Awesome. Thank you. I think this will be our last question, and it's about recruiting, recruiting on a budget, recruiting for early stage teams. Any tips and tricks that might not actually use any funding for hiring employees, for hiring interns? Any resources you would recommend to anyone? Stephanie, our veteran recruiter, any comments there?
Oh, I know. I feel like I'm going to say LinkedIn, right? And networking. I feel like I don't have any magic bullet places for people to go. But like just so heavily reliant on the network and LinkedIn.
I don't think there is a silver bullet to recruiting. So I think it is hard work and you kind of got to go in there. So networking is kind of the way to go. Anyone else?
I can just jump in really quickly. So at least in the life sciences space, I'm aware now of an organization called Project On-Ramp that's all about internship opportunities for underrepresented communities. And so I know there are other resources like that. I believe in the past I worked with somebody from like Resilient Coders as an example.
Mm-hmm.
And so for those that are interested in looking for, individual groups that are targeting underrepresented communities or other communities that are very specific, there are definitely communities out there that exist that are good for building pipeline and providing opportunities, et cetera.
Awesome. So with a minute left, I'm going to start wrapping up. I just want to thank all of you again for sharing all your thoughts and wisdom to kind of this greater community. I'm sure everyone is super appreciative of it. I know I am. I think all of us posted our LinkedIns at some point, but you can probably find us all easily if you just Google our names and our companies. Please feel free to connect with us. I think we'd all be eager to kind of support the greater community. So thanks again.